Everyone knows Pokemon. It is in fact the highest grossing franchise ever created. The handheld RPG spawned an anime, a collectible card game, and multiple generations of die-hard fans. While Pokemon is an incredible force of nature in almost every kind of entertainment media, I'll be looking at the video games. While Pokemon popularized the creature-catching genre of RPG, in recent years, it has fallen short in other, arguably more important aspects. I'm going to be looking at what exactly the early games did well that might be taken for granted in today's Pokemon-ruled society. I'll be talking about non-linearity, difficulty, and unique storytelling in Pokemon FireRed. Now, while Pokemon FireRed wasn't really my first Pokemon game, it was most certainly the one that I played the most. In fact, it is the only cartridge of mine that I actually have the original save file on it still. But, for the sake of clarity, I am playing on an emulator for the footage that I've provided, and all other footage used will be credited in the description. Let's get started. Before we dive into what specifically makes the older Pokemon games excellent, I should absolutely give the rundown on what the premise of Pokemon is. Pokemon is a game where you play as a 10-year-old child who is sent by his neighbor, who happens to be the leading mind in the region on Pokemon research, on a journey to fill out an encyclopedia of Pokemon. Now, Pokemon are essentially animals in this universe, but smarter and cooler looking. So the professor gives you and his grandson a Pokemon of your own, making you a Pokemon trainer. Now the grandson's a bit of a jerk and he immediately wants to have a Pokemon battle. You battle him, you make your way out of town, you get turned around and suddenly go back to your hometown. I never really understood why they do this, but they do. You get your Pokédex in your hometown, head through Route 1 yet again, have an old man teach you how to capture Pokemon to add to your team, go through a forest, get into another town, and learn about the gym challenge from this guy who is literally gatekeeping you until you defeat the first gym leader. You've now experienced the gameplay of Pokemon. Exploration, discovering hidden items or Pokemon in the area you're exploring. Battle trainers in this new area. Clear the new area, and defeat a boss in the town immediately after clearing out the new area. Heal, rinse, repeat. This is the loop that is used countless times in these games. Viridian Forest, Mount Moon, the SS Sand, Rock Tunnel, the raid on Slifko, the Pokemon Mansion. All of these exist right before gym battles. These areas are used to let your Pokemon gain experience, to level up, become stronger, and possibly evolve. Now, speaking of Pokemon, the single greatest things about these games is choice. There's 150 Pokemon available to use, and you can only have 6 Pokemon in your party at once. This leads to an incredible amount of choice and replayability. In all honesty, I think this is why Pokemon games don't go down in price. They only go up. A 15-year-old game in this franchise can still go for as much as $40. Do you know what else helps a game's replayability? Now, you've just begun your playthrough. You're on your way out of Mount Moon and you enter in Cerulean City. You notice a house blocked by the police, a gym, a Pokemon, and a Poke Center in the middle of town. You decide to heal up your team after your first cave and look inside the gym. Now, depending on your team composition, you may breeze through the gym trainers, or you may not. Either way, you'll probably get through the gym with ease. Until you're face to face with Misty's Starmie. Its Stab, Water Pulse, and Recover destroys you and your team. You decide to explore more before coming back. You fight your rival before the Nugget Bridge. More on that later. You head up the Nugget Bridge and you find Bill. After you de-Pokemon him, you head back down to Cerulean and you notice something. The police have moved and you can enter the house. What do you do? If you enter the house, you'll find it in a state of disarray with the rocket grunt who caused it all out back. Now from there, you can make your way down through the underground path and find yourself in Vermilion City. Now, eventually, you'll have to go back and face down that Starmie, as the third gym will not open up without cut, and you need to get Misty's badge in order to use the HM for cut. But look how far you got. Regardless of your starter choice, the path you took gave your team so much more experience and made the fight with Misty much more possible. Or you could have fought Misty again as soon as you came back from Bill's place and had a tougher fight, but you wouldn't need to backtrack to Cerulean just yet. This kind of choice repeats itself many times over the further you go into your playthrough. The gym order in these games is the most flexible gym order the series has ever seen. If you're looking to explore as much of the region as you can doing the minimum amount of boss fights, you really only need Misty's badge for cut and then Koga's badge for surf. A sizable amount of the world opens up with cut, and every land route opens up after you complete a few story events with Team Rocket and obtain the Poke Flute. And the last town becomes available with surf. Sure, you may not be able to make it to the very end of the game, or discover all the secrets with only 3 badges. And since the HM for Fly is locked behind Lieutenant Surge's badge, fast traveling would really be out of the question for a while. But you can discover every mainland route and complete a decent chunk of the Pokédex doing only 3 badges. And there really is an entire challenge based on doing just that. Now, since we're on challenges, I guess it's time for another point that I have. Alright, let's take a few steps back. You've been entrusted with your starter Pokemon and you're heading to Viridian City. Now, the old man hasn't had his coffee yet, so you decide to go left. Your rival meets you, and he sends out a level 9 Pidgey and his level 9 starter right after. You have a little bit of experience from his very first fight, and maybe some wild Pokemon fights, but it isn't enough. You get swept. Okay, let's fast forward a bit. We already know about the Starmie waiting for you in Misty's gym. So let's say you're coming into Cerulean for the first time, and your team is a little beat up from Mount Moon, but you decide to hold off on healing just yet after all. There's a whole new area to explore. You go north, your rival crosses the bridge, battles you, and beats you with ease since you're still weak from Mount Moon. That's twice in the first few hours he's ambushed you. He doesn't wait, he doesn't ask for permission, he sees you, and he potentially destroys you. Now, rival and gym fights aside, you might say to yourself, Pokemon was only hard as a kid because you didn't know type combinations. Well, in FireRed and Leaf Green, you don't really have an excuse because the default button layout sets the shoulder buttons to help, which brings up a variety of different help sections, one of which is an in-game type effectiveness chart. This chart was the only reason I ever left the button mode set to help, and the game was still hard as nails as a kid. Now, the fight against the champion in FireRed is always a challenge, simply because of the level gap. When you fight the champion / your rival outside the plateau, he's around 10 levels lower than he is in the champions room. You also don't get the experience share until the later half of the main game, and only if you are constantly catching new Pokemon and going out of your way to talk to Professor Oak's aides. The game would never help you unless you looked high and low first. In a sense, it wouldn't help you unless you're willing to help yourself. It is never handholdy. It is always willing to test you, and it is always willing to show you more if you decide to look for it. The story in Pokemon games is always kind of a weak point for some people. It never really tells a vivid tale. Instead, it opts to create a world where you can get lost in it instead. The opening lines of the game even state, "Welcome to the world of Pokemon." In a world where you are searching far and wide, you want the areas that you are searching for to feel different than the one before. And FireRed honestly achieves this. I can remember and describe each town's name from the 3rd generation by heart. Partially because they're named after callers, but the saying still holds true for Ruby and Sapphire as well. We won't get into that quite yet. Pallet Town is a small village. Pewter City sits beside a mountain, so of course it would be dedicated to archaeology and rocks. Cerulean City is next to a body of fresh water, so it's more of a recreational aquatic town. Vermilion sits next to salt water, so it's a port city. Lavender Town is of course the spooky town with its iconic music, and the Pokemon Tower looming over everything. Celadon is a large enough city to house the game corner, the department store, and also a criminal hideout. Saffron City sits in the middle of the region, and because of this, it is the largest city. It's so big that it has 2 gyms and a giant corporation in the middle of town. Fuchsia City is a zoo, and Cinnabar Island is so far out of the way and isolated, it's the best place to experiment on Pokemon. The only unremarkable town, in my opinion, is Viridian City, which, to its credit, it is the very first city you visit, and it is the last gym you challenge, but other than that, it doesn't really have anything to separate itself from the other towns. The world itself is excellent, but how you view the world is something that isn't talked about nearly as much as it should be. The story is light in Pokemon FireRed and Leaf Green, and what story is there is actually told in a very creative way. Before you step foot in Mount Moon, there's a letter on the table in the Pokemon Center talking about Team Rocket. Now, it's not mandatory to read this letter, but if you do, it will make more sense when you eventually run into them in Mount Moon. It's more of a show, don't tell method of storytelling. If you want more info, just look around the world and you're bound to find some supplemental details. Another example is, of course, the Pokemon Mansion. When you visit the mansion, it is in a destroyed, decrepit state, and if you look around the basement, you'll find diary entries about Mew and Mewtwo, and it is implied heavily that Mewtwo escaped the facility and destroyed it in the process. This ties in incredibly well to the very final battle in Cerulean Cave. In every mainline Pokemon game, you are a silent protagonist. Now, although you're a silent protagonist in every game, I think it only truly works in this game, and maybe Gold and Silver too, but mostly in this game. The overall story in this game is low stakes. You are a child completing an encyclopedia and a gym challenge, and you happen to thwart a criminal enterprise in the process. But why? For myself, the only reason I ever cared to stop Team Rocket is because they had a goon blocking the Saffron Gym. I had no motive to care about what happened to some building or some company. As selfish as it sounds, I only wanted to continue my journey. Now, because I was a silent protagonist, the narrative never gave my character any other goals other than what I had set for him. There was no end-of-the-world scenario with a hyper-legendary Pokemon that needed to be put to sleep. It was just 2 children trying to one-up one another. In fact, because of this premise, the climax of the story happens at the very end of the game, during the final rival champion fight, and not wedged between gym battles or before the Pokemon League. Putting the story climax before the Pokemon League almost makes the Pokemon League feel not important. In fact, on my very first Sapphire playthrough, I thought I had beat the game after I KO'd Kyogre. It had never crossed my mind that I could capture it, or that there could possibly be anything more powerful than a world-ending event. In fact, wouldn't it make more sense for the champion to intervene rather than have a child face down a literal world-eating monster? I guess my point is, the less story there is, the less holes that can be poked in it. Most, if not all, the topics in this video are either altered or absent from the newer generation games, although there are a few exceptions. For non-linearity, the Generation 4 games have a somewhat flexible gym order, along with some added bonuses if you explore around. Generation 5 really stepped up the narrative in my opinion, but it's been lackluster ever since Black and White 2, and really both of those games had their spikes in difficulty. Black 2 even had a hidden hard mode, but in Generations 6 through 8, everything else just falls short, from the unavoidable hand-holding to the generic end-of-the-world stakes, and of course, the built-in experience share. The things that make the older games better RPGs have been gutted, and it really is disappointing because the quality of life changes that keep being made in the newer generations are excellent. But in reality, it's no real replacement for what we've lost along the way.